Hi everybody, I'm hoping that this video is not going to go past an hour long because I am covering quite a lot of points here. But I'm starting with a video that H. Thomas Ackerman made recently as a response to a video I'd made myself, which he shares the link here, in which I make a few comments about Chris Hedges and his approach to certain problems of American society. And so H. Thomas Ackerman has made some excellent points here, and he's shared a couple of, I don't know if it's the same painting, one in ultraviolet light, or it's two separate paintings, but one at the beginning and one at the end here. Very beautiful paintings and expressive of really how we should be living within a symbiotic synergy in the world around us. And I think for myself, you know, if anybody could do a portrait of me, this would be it. You know, me in my hat and feeling as part of everything, and everything is a part of me. That we live in this symbiotic synergy of life, energy that has created us, and we are independent within it and also interdependent within it, and that there's a law that allows for this flourishing and expression of being within that, within a spirit of love and within a consciousness of law, because we live in a lawful universe. We would not be able to exist if the universe was not operating according to a system of law, you see. And we as a species are required to, if we are going to attain the level of intelligence and actually be born into our universal being, then we do need to grasp the concept of law, of true law, in the sense of a beneficent law that allows life to flourish, that we understand that even as human beings we are not all equal, and in many respects life is not fair in that sense, but nonetheless the law is fair. The law applies equally to all, and that is fundamentally what is wrong with our world, is that the law is not equally applied to all. There's some people who live above the law, and in fact we don't really live by a system of law. We live outside of universal law of abundance and compassion that fundamentally upholds all our human rights. So, you know, regardless of whether you're disabled, no matter what colour you are, what faith you are, whether you're rich or poor, you're all entitled to your human rights. Everybody's entitled to shelter, to food, to healthcare, to education, to all the things that we need as human beings. A law that recognises our fundamental and most basic human needs and strives to satisfy them. That's justice. That's equality. In the eyes of the law, a child has as much rights to justice as a rich person, you see. And in fact, the more bigger and powerful you are in this world, the more responsible we are, and the more accountable we are, you see. Whereas the way that we're living at the moment, it is the total opposite of that. The more bigger and powerful you are, the less accountable you are, and the less the law will apply to you. But the smaller and more insignificant you are, apparently the more accountable you are, and the more heavy the weight of their actually criminal rapist law of might equals right to do as thy will fall down on people. And it is exactly this fundamental crime that is allowing for all of the crimes to be committed, and the social dis-ease that we are currently living in. And that was my comment really about Chris Hedges, is that he's one of these people that addresses the symptoms. He addresses the symptoms, but at the same time is missing the point of the underlying disease. And of course he never wants to really address that, because what essentially he is doing, I now suspect, like many like him who are in positions of power and influence but try to use it supposedly for the good, is really to assuage the inner guilt that he feels, you see, for his position as a white person, and that somehow he thinks that by doing the things that he's doing is actually doing something good, when really he is only addressing the symptoms, and in doing so is allowing the fundamental disease to fester, because ultimately he's only addressing his own inner sense of guilt, his own inner sense of something being wrong. Now, H. Thomas Ackerman makes some excellent points in this video. I'm going to leave you the link to it. But toward the end of the video, he talks about forgiveness, and now that has inspired me to make this video, because he says, all you Bible thumpers out there, who you find it very easy to forgive other people, how about forgiving yourselves? How about forgiving yourselves? And that is such an important point, because that is the crux of it all, isn't it? That in order to forgive ourselves, we need to face ourselves. We need to accept that we've done something wrong. We need to be able to have an ability to empathise with the victims of the crimes, whether they be historical crimes from ancestors, that their actions have today placed us in this position of social power or social supremacy or social privilege. That we face the ongoing legacy that just as the people, the rich people, the people in power, the people in control of the institutions and the corporations, that look, you know, you have all of this wealth and power. It's been passed down to you through the generations precisely because these crimes were committed. And these people are all suffering to this very day because they haven't inherited buildings and wealth and power. They've been inheriting a legacy of consciousness, a legacy of oppression, a legacy of victimisation through the crimes. And to be able to empathise with the need for somebody to take responsibility. Well, can you expect the people who are suffering in the oppression, who are suffering, are born into those crimes, to take, how can they take any responsibility, really, other than trying to vote for somebody that they hope will take responsibility, who ultimately turn out to be a set of liars who are, again, only willing to address the symptoms with a few crumbs of concessions, but never is the underlying dis-ease addressed. Never are the true crime and criminals called to account. Never is there any true sense of justice. And still, the Nats, you know, were balking heavily on the Nats, and happy swallowed the camels, you see. And of course, the people, the far-right extremists, especially the Christian far-right extremists, are battling against facing the guilt of the crimes of their ancestors. That because they've personalised this white supremacy as a judgment that justifies their very existence and their privilege, okay? Because they need to stand with that judgment, because otherwise then they also will have to accept the personification of the guilt, because they're living in a total misunderstanding of life and really what has happened, because it isn't required of them to accept the guilt, you see, but they don't want to admit they're wrong. They're afraid of admitting they're wrong, because we're all born into this world consciousness of crime and punishment, you see. So, you know, as a child, you did something naughty, oh, you're going to get a good battering. And according to this hard right extremism that does include hard right, fanatical form of so-called Christianity, is very heavily focused on, you know, battering children. We have crimes because children aren't being battered enough. We have crimes because women have rights. We have crimes because black people are no longer slaves, you see. We have crimes because all of these South American people are illegally entering into America. There's always somebody else. We have crimes because there's Muslims in America. We have crimes because there's Jews in America. We have crimes because there's homosexuals in America. We need to remove all these people. We need to oppress them. We need to kill them if necessary, so that we can establish our order of white supremacy, our judgment, because we are right and we cannot be wrong, because that would mean we would have to be punished, because that's their mentality. It is an Ouroboros. A total misunderstanding and misapplication of the concept of the Ouroboros, as was stolen from the native tribes people of South, the South Americas. But, you know, like I say, everything they steal, they bastardise and corrupt. It becomes corrupted in their hands because they have no true understanding, because they're coming from this place of supremacy in the first place. Because before there was any such thing as real racism in the world, there already was a form of racism operating, say, within a country like Britain, where we had this socio-nobility looking down on the peasant population, who were judged as subhuman. You know, the word Cockney, as applied to the common Londoners hundreds of years ago, was a derogatory term. Okay, it was a derogatory term, and to indicate subhuman, the subhumans, the inferiors, these people, the poor, were considered an inferior species. And then from there, they were able to go to Africa and say, well, you know, these are inferior because, you know, they haven't managed to invent a gun, you see, or they haven't managed to invent this or that. They've got a different culture to us. So they're considered subhuman. And then the white people that are fleeing from the horror and poverty of Britain, that has grown up, that has developed through this culture of superiority and inferiority. So then they go to America and they apply exactly the same to the people, to the native people of the lands they go. Oh yeah, well, you're all inferior, you're subhuman, we're superior. That judgment allows them to bypass empathy, to bypass compassion, to bypass mercy, to bypass kindness, to exploit for one's own personal profit, because I am privileged, because the judgment stands in my favour, and I don't want to know that it's wrong, and I will fight through century after century against anybody who dares say that my judgment is wrong, who dares disproves the fact that I am wrong. Sorry, who dares disprove that I am right. And they call themselves right. That's what they call themselves, right wing. The right thinkers, the far right. Again, the word spells. It casts a spell on human consciousness. We are right. We are standing with these judgments. These judgments are right. Well, no, they're not. Actually, they're wrong, because black people are not inferior human beings. Women are not inferior human beings. A child is not an inferior human being. We all have equal rights under God's law. You have no right to exploit us. You have no right to use my body just for the fact that I need to eat, and you've taken control of all the resources. And then you're going to judge me for the way that I'm forced to survive in this lawless society of a law, the Luciferian law, rapist law of might equals right to do as thy will, as directly opposed to universal law of right equals might to do as thy will. A law that operates on a fundamental principle of compassion, that gives equality to life. Because, you know, like I say, life isn't fair, but the law is fair, you see. That's the whole point of it. That's the whole point of it. That the law recognises the needs of everybody from the first to the last. The law takes everything into account. The law empathises with the victim and the offender, if necessary. But it doesn't mean that because we can empathise with an offender that we will just ignore the crimes and call that forgiveness, because that is what is going on. That these people, the core, and I'm not talking about all Trump supporters, I'm talking about the core fanatical Trump supporters who will go out and commit crimes on behalf of protecting a Confederate statue of somebody who supported slavery, okay, who will kill and maim people on behalf of protecting a statue. that supports slavery, of a guy who supports slavery. Right, I'm talking about that core component, that level of what is outright fascism. They call themselves far right, you see, whereas really they're far wrong, because slavery is against the law. Universal law nowhere upholds slavery of any human being. Okay? So in order for them to avoid facing the fact that they are wrong, they will stick by these judgments that support them, and they will fight against. They will call us radical because we are challenging their illegal law with the real universal law. Because if we're outside of that universal law, we will suffer as a species. It will destroy our planet. That is a fact. You know, here it is. UN issues dire warning of the pollution. I mean, I notice here they don't talk about the pollution of Fukushima. You know, this is what's happening, because apparently our planet is expendable, life is expendable, and that was the whole point of this video that H. Thomas Ackerman has made, is why life is cheap, or why is life cheap, both a question and a statement, because that is the reality that we are living in, because we're living outside of the law, because we aren't correctly understanding forgiveness for a start, because we can't just forgive somebody, can we? In the sense of forgiveness includes a sense of the remorse, the repentance, the acceptance, the empathy, the ability for the offender to empathise with the victim of their wrongdoing, and to say, oh gosh, I'm really sorry, to show genuine sorrow for that, to show a genuine attempt to do better and not to do that again. That's the point of it, that forgiveness requires the person who's being forgiven to know what they've done wrong, how damaging it's been, what are the results of those damages, and then for them to take some sort of the responsibility to address that and to endeavour not to do that again, and perhaps, if necessary, to compensate or to contribute towards delivering the kind of changes that are then required to address the ongoing problems that their wrongdoing, whether it be by them personally in their lives today or by their ancestors that have placed them in positions of the privileges that they enjoy today. You know, that there needs to be radical change according to the radical problems that have been imposed by a radical level of ignorance of universal law. Now, when we're talking about forgiveness, a prime example here is this young woman, a British-born citizen. Remember, she was born in Britain. Her parents are Bangladeshi, but she was born in Britain, so she's a young Muslim girl. She's now age 19 in 2019. So at 15, she obviously was a victim of online grooming, to the extent that she ended up becoming a radicalised Muslim and went off to Syria with some guy from Holland who was also a radicalised Muslim to join ISIS. You see, she was 15. So, you know, what did British authorities do to try and rescue her, to bring her back, to save her from her own self? And bearing in mind that Britain is a country, so, you know, look, she was born in the year 2000. So look what happened in those years between 2000 and 2015, when she was 15 years old. Look at what this country had done to Islam and this radicalisation of the public and Muslims, because we know for a fact MI5 employed Abu Hamza Hookman to go and preach radical Islam in London mosques and to radicalise the London Muslim youth and to recruit them and send them off to Pakistani ISIS training camps, and then next minute they're unleashed into Iraq or Libya or Syria, and they're there chopping the heads off teenagers who've watched football or played a rock guitar. Okay? That they created this, that they helped to fund it, that they helped to to create a monster that then could give them justification for this war on terror. That actually what it really amounts to is totally demolishing and destroying the Middle Eastern population. That's what it ultimately has amounted to, hasn't it? In order to steal their resources, their oil, and to totally demolish their essentially socio-capitalist societies. So she's, as a young lady, you know, as a young woman, she's grown up in that climate within Britain as a marginalised citizen, as a Muslim, witnessing this increasing levels of Islamophobia that has arisen in Britain to the extent, you know, you've got EDL and Britain First supporters marching through Muslim areas with the wooden crosses and the Zionist and British flags, with big signs saying no more mosques or no to Sharia law and all this kind of stuff. So she was primed. She's primed to be radicalised, isn't she? She was 15. So she made a mistake. She left Britain and she ended up in Syria, and then she ends up finding herself in a Syrian refugee camp, pregnant, begging the Home Secretary, Sajid Javid, to let her return to Britain, okay, so that she can return to Britain. And she said, I want to raise my son, my baby, in Britain. I want to raise my baby in Britain. I want to come home. And Sajid Javid revoked her citizenship. She was born here. She was born here. So apparently he's got the power to revoke her citizenship, because when she was 15, without taking into account, and this is what I mean. You know, look, when I first saw this story, it was on Facebook, and the comments underneath were just terrible from the general Brexiteer type British public that were like, yeah, she's made a bed, let her lie in it, and blah blah blah. Okay, but all right, I can understand why the people who have been themselves radicalised by the continuing lies and rhetoric that's been going on since the invasion of Iraq, that we know was based on a pack of lies. You know, people like her have witnessed the total hypocrisy of what has been going on, and the lies and the resulting Islamophobes that are in Britain right now that constitute a part of the British population. So I can almost expect to witness that from the British public, but also the empathy that came through as well, of like, well, you know, she is a British citizen and it's not her fault, she was only 15, that taking into account. But when it comes to the people that are leading us, that are in charge of our society, okay, that are heading our society, like for example the British Home Secretary, I expect a much higher level of intelligence and understanding of the situation in both breadth and depth of the perspective, that he's going to take into account that, look, she's a Muslim, she's been radicalised, she has, you know, been marginalised in Britain, all the things that are in place there. And also take into account that, yes, she is a British citizen, she was only 15, she did make a mistake, my gosh, she's pregnant, that baby is innocent, you know, and really is a British citizen, so let's rescue her, let's bring her home. Let's show her what a true Christian society is, as opposed to this pack of lies and this false Christianity that she's grown up witnessing her whole life until she was 15 in Britain. Okay, so what does British Home Secretary Sajid Javid do? Okay, he revoked her passport, saying Begum hadn't shown any remorse. The teen had told newspaper reporters she didn't have a problem with ISIS actions, including the beheading of captives. I mean, now that just totally outraged me, because I'm sorry, what level of intelligence has Sajid Javid got then? That he cannot understand that a young 19-year-old woman, British citizen, who'd made an error when she was 15, an error of judgment, was groomed and radicalised, that he cannot accept that right now she's in a refugee camp in Syria surrounded by ISIS. Is she really going to sit there and tell news reporters that is she going to condemn ISIS while she's there? Would she even survive the night? Would we judge the words of people who are being held hostage by ISIS? Would we judge them because they start praising their ISIS captors while they've got ISIS standing behind them with their swords? Do we judge that hostage, or do we not empathise with their situation? Do we not show a deeper level of understanding? That we could not understand that, look, she's in a very vulnerable situation. She's in a refugee camp, she's pregnant. Is she really going to start criticising ISIS? Will she even survive the night? Because while those newspapers and reports are going saying, yeah, she's condemned ISIS, she'd be dead. How is it possible? How is it possible for a Home Secretary to show such a shallow level of conscience, compassion, understanding? To be incapable of taking anything into account. And he's probably a Muslim from his name. You know, it's like, pardon? Muslims follow Jesus. They accept Jesus as the prophet of God. Islam preaches forgiveness, mercy, kindness, to take everything into account. But no. The world has to judge her. And never mind that this was her third pregnancy. She'd already lost 2 children. 2 babies had died. This was her third pregnancy. 1 baby died through malnutrition, the other through illness. And now, because Britain refused her, that's it. Her third baby has died. So she'd already lost 2 babies. She's there literally begging for a child's life. And instead, all the British Home Secretary can do, Britain, okay, as a power can do, is judge her for what she said to newspaper reporters. And leave her to suffer witnessing yet another child dying. Who knows what a wonderful person that child could have grown to be if she'd been allowed to come to Britain and we'd shown her the kindness and compassion of a true Christian nation, which allegedly Britain is. Apparently we're governed by a Christian queen, ordained by God to be queen. She's head of our allegedly Christian church and presides over our allegedly largely Christian parliament, which even the Muslim members are partly Christian because, as I say, they also accept Jesus as a prophet of God. And yet the whole, again, people would prefer to sit with the judgments against her, sit with the judgments rather than stand with empathy, compassion and understanding that allows us to forgive. So now, moving on to this story here, which is a real news story, and being interviewed here is this teacher, Daniel Parsons, and he's been interviewed, I think her name's Dharma Nur. Absolutely brilliant interviewer, very impressed with Dharma Nur. She showed the humility and respect, the immense respect that she obviously shows to this man, and she's genuinely moved by what he's saying. You know, this is how news should be. This is true news. And what this man has to say is a teacher in Baltimore, and the video's titled "Baltimore is Slaughtering Black Children," and what he has to share, because he's a guy who works in the field, right? He knows where he's coming from. He knows what he's dealing with. He's thought about the whole situation, the breadth, the length and the breadth of it. He understands exactly what's going on, exactly what is needed, and he totally understands the levels of oppression and and the ongoing the resistance to addressing those fundamental problems, and how, you know, the liberalist approach is to throw a few crumbs at the problem. And, you know, all these people that revere the Chris Hedges and Chomskys of this world, you know, they are nothing. They are nothing. They have nothing to say beyond what this man is explaining here. And of all the video links that I'm leaving under here, if you only watch one of them, please watch this and listen to what this man is saying, because he is a guide. He is a true guide, and what he's sharing is absolutely spot on fact, because he's explaining that, look, the children, whether it's poor black children or impoverished white children, there's a weight of oppression that we need to recognise, and especially in relation to the black children, to the violence, the gun violence, the ongoing racism that they have to face, the historical legacy that's still to this day afflicting their parents, the levels of oppression that parents are living under. And I understand that. I grew up in an impoverished multicultural community. I grew up in a dysfunctional family with a working mum and an alcoholic dad, and I understand exactly all the pressures that he's talking about. I grew up with them. I grew up understanding it, that how unfair it is to be judging the children because they're not performing as well as the children in white middle class or even black middle class areas, because they just don't have the same resources, and they're living under a level of oppression that most people, they're living under a level of oppression that even people couldn't even imagine it. You know, like a lot of these middle class people, if they even had to experience a tenth of it, they'd be down at the doctors demanding antidepressants. So, you know, again, the empathy, because he can empathise, he understands, okay, and he needs to be heard. And yes, it is about forgiveness, isn't it? To be able, that society still cannot forgive the children for suffering the brunt of the crimes that have been ongoing throughout history. Instead, we have to judge. Okay, and yes, the children are paying the price of it. Now, here, I'm going to get onto this now. This is from the Young Turks. I was so disgusted with this that I wrote a comment, and looking down at it now, they've actually taken my comment down, but I said, right, that is it. I'm finished with you, Young Turks. I am never going to watch nor share your videos again, though I will share this one so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. But that's it. Now, the guy who sat with him here, this guy, John Iadarola, right, him I have got a lot of respect for, and it's him that I quote in my other video that H. Thomas Ackerman is talking about in his video, Words, Spells and Suicide. I actually quote him, is his reference to this far-right extremist rhetoric that Trump comes out with, it, you know, as a swirling vortex of insanity, which I thought was ace. And I do get the impression, I had a very strong impression that John here was very uncomfortable during this session with Cenk, who's obviously his superior as, you know, the main sort of producer of the Young Turks. Now, so to you, John, I hope that you managed to extricate yourself from Young Turks and, you know, join a more progressive, honest news network. Maybe the Real News. Get on to the Real News, okay, the Real News network. Because what Cenk does here is absolutely disgusting, okay? And again, it does totally relate to the concept of why we forgive people and how we can forgive people. And this is a prime example, you see. Now, he's talking about Trump's rhetoric and Trump's threatening violence. He does talk about the army and the police. We know the radical racist police that have been shooting, not you know, mainly black people, but also white people as well, have suffered serious violence of these new kind of police officer that seems to have taken over in America, where, you know, you're basically dealing with people that ride on a power trip. They enjoy a power trip. They're fundamentally sadistic even in how they're treating the American people. And yes, they are killing a disproportionate amount and assaulting a disproportionate amount of black people. So Trump's here has threatened the American public. You know, who is he threatening here? Is he threatening the judiciary? Is he threatening intelligence? Is he threatening ordinary average members of the public? Is he threatening the women that are coming forward that want to sue him for defamation because he's called them all liars because in face of his sexual attacks against them? And we know that he is a self-confessed sex offender, you see. So he's already confessed to multiple offences against women. And so he is threatening violence, not just from the army and the police, but also bikers, he refers to, and others. What? The thugs. The kind of thugs that will go and do stuff like this in New Zealand. You've got, again, a guy from Australia, a white Australian in New Zealand, commits this horrific attack against Muslims in worshipping in the mosque, brutally murders people, apparently live streams it all while he is doing it, and he is an outright Trump supporter, and he fully believes in this superiority, again, coming from a nation like Americans, the far-right Americans that support Trump. As I say, I'm not talking about all Trump supporters, I'm talking about this core extremist faction that do uphold the principles of white supremacy, because they can't face life outside that judgment that proves that, sorry, those judgments are wrong. Those judgments amount to a crime against humanity, and that crime is ongoing. Because you look at Australia and you see that the native Australians are still living in poverty. They are still living in degradation, and they're still bearing the legacy, because while the rich Australians, the white Australians, have been inheriting all the privileges that they gave themselves when they took over that land, at the same time the native peoples have inherited a legacy of oppression and ignorance against them and negative judgments and crime. So in order to justify that situation, rather than him taking responsibility and thinking, well, what my ancestors did was wrong, and I don't personally feel guilty about that because I didn't commit those crimes, but I do feel that I have a responsibility to demand that my society lifts these people up out of their poverty and listens to them and honours their culture, provides for them so that they can self-develop, not us imposing our culture on them, saying, oh, well, we're going to build you a university, but for us to actually facilitate them to continue to pick up where they left off and continue in their self-development according to their own culture. You see, because the people that invaded Australia, these white people, who themselves had arisen through a supremacist type social structure that, as I've identified as the wolf pack, the Roman imposition of society as following this wolf pack, that they went into Australia and they saw people that they decided were primitive. But they weren't primitive. They might have appeared primitive according to the tools or whatever, but no, they'd successfully lived on their land. Their lands were pristine. There was no pollution. Nature was flourishing. They were flourishing. They were a successful species. There weren't the levels of crime and poverty and degradation as in the countries from where these white supremacists had come from. Why? Because the native Australian people, like the native American people had developed a system of law, but actually the native Australian people were of the highest consciousness, in the sense that they had achieved an amazing thing. They had achieved the ending of war, right? That is amazing, that they had managed to totally eradicate war among themselves. And don't forget, Australia is a huge nation, a huge continent, land, that could swallow up England in a tiny corner. And actually the whole of Europe, okay? But it's like, these people living in this huge landmass had managed to eradicate war. And they'd done it by all of them agreeing to honour the law. They had established a law that fostered and promoted the respect between people, the empathy of dignity, of each other's dignity, of people's rights. There was a law. There were etiquettes to follow that showed respect for each tribe, that they all respect each other, and anybody who failed to respect, then they would be called to account. And that law had allowed them to live peacefully together, to protect their environment, that their environment and they were flourishing. But no, apparently they were a primitive, inferior species, as judged, a separate species almost of humanity, as judged by these white supremacists who had come from a totally criminal consciousness that lived outside of universal law and had exploited its own lands to such a degree that now they needed to go and exploit other nations in order to keep their own supremacist power structure going, because they could no longer rob and rape off the people below, because the people had nothing, and they need more and more and more. So let's go and exploit other lands, and let's judge against other people, let's judge them inferior. And so of course it's going to, such a culture hundreds of years later, as Australia, like America, is going to produce its Chris Hedges liberalist type, who are going to address the symptoms and, oh, well, we've got to help stopping the native people from becoming alcoholics and things like this, but never addressing the fundamental cause of it, you see. So, or you're going to end up with people like this Trump supporter fascist, or the other Trump supporter fascists who are sending letter bombs and shooting people in synagogues and shooting black people, and you're going to end up with that kind of extremists, because they just refuse to accept that they were wrong, and they are happy to live with the lie. And that's part of being strong, is that you can live with a lie, is that you can stand by these judgments, because that's your right, because that's what life is about, is supremacy. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who's wrong or right, it matters who has got the might to impose their will on the rest of us. And that is exactly why universal law is established, is to stop the rapist, murderer, looter in his or her tracks. And forgiveness is a part of that, to allow the people that have been infected, like even this guy that did this himself is a victim. He is a victim of the very consciousness that created his consciousness as a person on this earth today. That not to punish him, but yes, he will have to be removed from society because he's a risk, but educate him to understand, look, you have done wrong, everything you've been living by, to the point where he breaks down into tears as he realises that, look, you've been living right outside of your humanity. You are a victim of crime now, from the very criminals that rely on people like you to keep their crimes going, so that they never have to They aren't going to go out and just shoot people. They'll do it through their governments. They'll do it through their Donald Trump's lies. Okay? Exactly the kind of lies that Donald Trump is threatening here. So what is my problem with Cheng? Because Cheng actually compares Donald Trump to the Venezuelan president, the democratically elected leader of Venezuela, Maduro. He says Trump is no different to Maduro. Okay? Again, this is a man, obviously, he can't take into account that Venezuela is a nation under siege, as the UN rapporteur has explained. It's a medieval siege being in the form of sanctions afflicted against Venezuela. Why? Because the people have chosen a socio-capitalist leader that is prepared to give the people social housing, a living wage, national health care, education, honour their rights, that the people have voted for him in, according to the Carter Foundation, the fairest elections in the world. And Maduro's army have said they will stand by the democratically elected leader of their nation in the face of an attack from the likes of Trump and his entourage, the consciousness that he supports and that support him. Okay? As an army's right to do, and yet he's comparing, he's calling Maduro a dictator because he wants to uphold his people's human rights, and compares Donald Trump, you know, basically to him, saying he's no different to Maduro because Maduro's a dictator, and he's saying his army. He's basically saying Trump is saying Maduro is no different to Trump. But Trump is threatening his people. What he said there is treason. It is treasonous, isn't it? It is treasonous. What he said there is treasonous. He's threatening the people of his own nation with far-right, hard-right thugs, as we've witnessed. That is what he's threatening people with. And he is detracting from the severity and the danger of that threat, that treasonous statement from Trump. He's totally distracting from it by comparing him to the Venezuelan president. He has shown no empathy for the Venezuelan presidency and its administration in the face of the immense problems that they've experienced being under attack as organised by people like Trump and the people he supports, okay, as suffering under a medieval siege. Oh no, let's judge the president of Venezuela, because apparently he's not coping very well while his nation's under siege and being attacked from within by foreign empowered and paid attackers that basically just want to steal Venezuela's oil and send all the people back to the shanty towns and no education or healthcare for you, and you'll work for peanuts, you'll be our slaves. That is what is going on. And how can he, as a news presenter, apparently an alternative progressive news presenter, he cannot tell me that he does not understand that. And yet he is there using the very fact that Trump has issued this treasonous threat against his own populace. He is actually using that to add further judgment and detraction against the democratically elected leader of Venezuela, and put the Venezuelan people at risk, at further risk, in that very process, just by simply supporting that pack of lies, that lying narrative that simply wants to support crime and criminals. Of the kind of crime and criminals that creates the situation that ends up with loads of South Americans fleeing to America, and then America can use that to justify electing their own fascist president as well, can't they? Again, you're back to the misinterpretation of the Ouroboros as a reality, operating as a superpower on earth. It is absolutely disgusting. And you know, Jesus said, forgive them, Father, because they know not what they do. And we can, can't we? We can forgive somebody who's got mental health problems. They've really hurt us, but it's like, look, they've got mental health problems. We're just going to have to stay away from them, try and get them some help. Maybe one day they'll understand. But until that happens, we can't. It's like, you know, somebody that is sexually desires children. No matter how many times they say they're sorry, you know they're a danger to children. You're going to have to lock them up until you're absolutely sure that the therapy you've given them has worked to the degree that they're no longer a threat to children. Because we just can't allow the vulnerable and innocent to be at risk. Our forgiveness does not amount to ignorance. You see, we might be able to forgive, but we can't ignore if that person is an ongoing threat. We understand that some criminals will just say, oh, I'm sorry. But we know damn well they're going to carry on committing those crimes because the sorrow isn't genuine. Because they don't really understand what they've done or why they are wrong. They just simply want to get away with their crimes and then to commit more crimes. And so how? He knows. So how could I ever forgive Cenk? Yeah, if Cenk turned around and said, look, I'm really, really sorry, and yes, I've realised that I've become compromised. I am like dependent on funding from the people that watch us and support us, and I know a large portion of them are corporatists, and they don't like the socio-capitalist leader of Venezuela. They don't like what's being implemented there. They are actually far-right extremists, but you know, they're paying my wages, so you know, I daren't rock the boat here. So you're not a news presenter then, are you? Because you're prepared to tell lies and misguide. You're misguiding. What, so the public are paying you to misguide them? Well, why do we need the Young Turks? We've got the BBC for that. We've got Fox News. We've got MSNBC. We've got CNN to do that. Why do we need you, Cenk? It is actually disgusting. It is more disgusting from somebody like him because he supported Ojeda. He supported Ojeda. Ojeda, who wanted to give everything, exactly what Maduro and Chavez before him has given to the Venezuelan people, is what Ojeda wanted to give to American people. Oh, but Ojeda's had to stand down because he can't get the funding to run for presidency. I tell you, every American citizen worth your salt, if you really care about your country and you really are a true Christian, send Ojeda the money and let him run for presidency. But he can support Ojeda and yet at the same time condemn the Venezuelan presidency that was elected fairly. And in comparison to America's elections that got him into power, well, Cenk, why don't you go and have a word with Greg Palast? He'll tell you how corrupt the American election system is that got him into power. He'll tell you about it. So we've got a corrupt elections that get a corrupted president into power, a self-confessed sex offender, the kind of man who grabs women by the pussy and laughs about it. Okay, is that really the kind of intelligence that you need governing your country, America? And now he's threatening you with the mob? He's threatening the people of America with the mob? Anybody who stands up to him, oh, you better watch out. We all know what's happened to the women that have come forward, the death threats they've received. Even Christina Blasey Ford, who spoke against his nomination for Supreme Court judge and outed him as a sex offender, oh, she's still living in hiding under death threats. You know, and yet the Young Turks, he's like the goose that laid the golden egg for them. The amount of money and attention they have actually received on the strength of Trump, sitting around having a laugh about him. Oh, intimate, oh, he's a baby. What? People are dying when people have been shot, murdered, threatened, and you think it's all a laugh. And now he's issued this most dreadful threat against the American people, and you want to detract from that by focusing, telling a pack of lies, supporting a false narrative, a pack of lies against a president of a country that's under attack from this same man, and by the same force of fascist thugs. It's outrageous. It's outrageous. You see? And so for me to be able to forgive you, Chen, I have to explain that. I have to explain my upset. I have to let you know exactly what it is you have done wrong so that you can apologise for it, and you can show the remorse, and you can make amends and regain the respect that I did actually feel towards the Young Turks, though it has been diminishing as I've witnessed. The more powerful and richer you've become, the more polished, the less you have wanted to stick with the reality of what is going on in this world, and the more you're moving towards supporting the fictional narrative. But to actually detract from the horror of what Trump has threatened here by spouting these lies, these absolute outright lies against Venezuela, it is really abominable. And again, you know, lack of taking into account. We'll just judge the Maduro government for the fact that for their failings. We won't look at the successes, what they are still continuing to do despite being under siege, despite being attacked from a foreign empowered enemy from within. Despite all of that, they've still managed to keep to their programme of socio-capitalism, because we're not talking corporate communism, you know, we're talking something that is a threat to corporate capitalism, because it is demanding that no, you are not allowed to come and exploit the workforce as you see fit. Okay? People on this planet are not created for you to exploit them and use them like slaves. These women that are producing these babies and working their fingers to the bone to raise them, what are they getting out of it? Who's paying them for the people that you're going to be using to earn your profits and then throw away as you see fit? Yes, yes, yes. The crime is unbelievable when you really start looking at it. Forgiveness, forgiveness, forgiveness is not ignorance. And I will not ignore, okay? But I will forgive. I am very forgiving to people, no matter how angry I am, how upset, how hurt. If people are genuinely remorseful, and in my life I have forgiven people who have come to me in tears. Apologise, yes. But I have previously confronted them. And sometimes it's been years later. But they have come to me in tears and apologised. And my forgiveness is complete. But I will not ignore. I will not say, oh, well, you know, the Young Turks are supporting some things, but, you know, so I'll just ignore that, what Cenk said there. No, 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 no. And that's exactly what's been going on with Trump, with his Bible-thumping supporters. It's like, well, we forgive him. You don't forgive him. You're ignoring his crimes because you want something out of it, because he's fundamentally supporting your own crime, the historical crimes that you wish to avoid, because you wrongfully believe that by accepting responsibility you are also accepting the guilt. The guilt is with the dead and gone, okay? But reparations do need to be made. So as I say, at the core is an ability to empathise, as this man can empathise, as H. Thomas Ackerman expresses empathy here. You know, the synergy, the natural synergy of how, as a life being, this is what this painting's expressing, isn't it? The symbiotic synergy of life, of how humanity, we're part of the nature that surrounds us. There's no harsh dividing lines. But we hold our shape. You can see there's a shape there, that there's a human there, that the nature's there, that the colours, we're a part of each other. Okay? And that we understand why the rainbow is a covenant. Exactly, this picture is expressing it perfectly. Why is the rainbow a covenant? To show us how we are meant to live on planet Earth. Because there are no sharp dividing lines in a rainbow, are they? The colours merge, but each colour still holds its own. Each colour has the freedom of movement within that, from that one light source. It has the freedom. And each colour holds its own within that law, within that universal law that creates the rainbow. Each colour holds its own. There's merging at the edges, but each colour nonetheless holds its own, because that is the beauty of freedom within the beneficence of universal law, you see. Because universal law is a beneficent law there to protect us from crime and criminals. And the minute we step outside of that, you know, the crime and criminals will impose sharp dividing lines, and they will profit off us while we're battling with each other within these sharp dividing lines. Divide and rule is their strategy. And, you know, that is exactly what really well, what H. Thomas Ackerman is explaining here is that, you know, we don't need all these rules and regulations, really. We just need to live with respect, don't we? For our planet and for each other. And with a true concept of love, because that fundamentally what universal law upholds is unconditional love. That is what it provides, unconditional love. In the sense everybody is equally protected within that law. The law serves everybody equally. That is the true fullest expression of unconditional love of the universe for us in the law that it has provided for us. And if we live outside of that love, then love is always going to be conditional. It's going to be conditional on what colour you are, what faith you are, what class you are, how much money you have, how educated you are. There's always going to be a condition for the love when we live outside of that. So it's time to give credit where credit's due. And I'm ending this now giving credit to the universe that created us, and to the tree. The tree. Without that tree, I would not be here. And a part of my humanity is having the freedom to live like a rainbow. Okay? And all of us need to remember, look, each one of us amounts to a single raindrop. And together we are the storm that will deliver that rainbow into life. And that is what we need to understand, is that we are rainbow consciousnesses. And all the people who, hearing me, perhaps some of them feel affronted by me or even attacked by what I'm saying, because I'm questioning their white supremacist rhetoric or their classist rhetoric or their Islamophobic rhetoric, because I'm questioning that. You need to understand, I am not your enemy. I am a friend of the humanity within you, and I'm explaining all this not to judge you, not to punish you, but to help you to liberate yourself from these crime and criminals, to step out of the narratives and scripts that this world historically has written for us, even before we were born, for us to be these characters in their fiction, for us to get real and connect with our real human being within us. And so, yes, can I apologise that this is a long video? Perhaps it's not long enough, but I do sincerely thank you for taking the time to listen to me, and I do wish everybody all the best, and huge thanks to H. Thomas Ackerman, who, for what he's shared here, for what he has shared here, and what he has inspired me, you know. And this is how we work. We're a light, casting light, and our light, we share it, we fuel each other, and we support each other. And, you know, I have called H. Thomas Ackerman a 21st century Van Gogh, and he really is, you know, he really is. And what he shares is absolutely brilliant. I ask people to please listen to his video here and to his other videos, because we need to start listening to the people who work in the fields We work in the fields. We're the field workers. We know what we're talking about. You know, like this man knows what he's talking about. So I hope that I've explained here, you know, the foundation of forgiveness. We do need an amnesty that will allow people to just accept that, yeah, I've been doing wrong. I was living you know, and I am aware that I was doing wrong, and I'm stepping out of that. I'm changing. We need to allow that, you know, and again, I would give an amnesty even to change. If he's prepared to say, yes, I was wrong. I've thought again about Venezuela. Yes, I'm sorry, I should never have come. He's not even slightly comparable. It is like comparing a rape victim to the rapist. And this is what I mean about Luciferian law. We need to accept that this is what it is. That's what it amounts to. Rapist law. Forget the fictional Lucifer. Okay, Lucifer really is a living man, isn't he? What is a devil except a criminal? And it is rapist law we are living by, and basically he is supporting it. He right there has supported it. You know, he is trying to compare the victim of crime, to the criminal. He's saying that the victim of crime, you know, that the criminal is no different to the victim of crime, is basically what he's saying here. And that itself is a crime, to say that, coming from a position of power as he is, as a social media one of the top most popular presenters on the alternative media. It is absolutely outrageous. It is outrageous. And as I say, we need to, yes, challenge where we see this, but not to criticise, This isn't a criticism. This is an expression of righteous upset, of concern, righteous concern for the people of Venezuela, who are under serious threat of harm for no other reason, who have been suffering a medieval siege for no other reason than they've had the audacity to elect a leader who will uphold their human rights and establish what we all need, a socio-capitalist society. We need to end the divisions, unite, and start living in the natural symbiotic synergy of what created us.